Welcome back.
Yeah.
Yo, what's poppin' today? Good morning, good night, good afternoon, good 3 a.m. in the morning while you're binge watching all of the AxoSchools videos because you want to learn more.
Yeah, what he said. Welcome back to AxoSchools. Today we're shifting gears a bit and we're going to study some American history. This by no means will be a complete lesson on the American Revolution, but it will give you an idea of the events that led up to the war and some of the key battles and outcomes. We will also have a couple of really cool projects for you to complete along the way, so make sure you pay attention. Maya Angelou, an American poet and civil rights activist, once said, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again."
When we go over a history topic, it's important to think about what are the lessons learned, whether good or bad. If we don't learn from our ancestors, we are bound to repeat the same mistakes, and there's a lot of things that happened in the past that we don't really want to happen again.
That's right. History can be one of our greatest teachers and applies to all subjects because every topic has a backstory, whether it's the discovery of DNA or the creation of a new instrument. So today, let's learn the story of the American Revolution.
The American Revolution is sometimes called the Revolutionary War. You're going to hear us use both names, so don't get confused because they're the same thing. The Revolutionary War was a war unlike any other. It has been said that it was a war of ideas and ideals that shaped the course of human events.
With 165 different types of engagements from 1775 to 1783, the Revolutionary War was the reason for American independence.
Here are some of the key events and dates for the American Revolution and the War for Independence.
The Revolutionary War was between the Kingdom of Great Britain and the 13 British American colonies.
The American colonists did not like the way the British were treating them, especially when it came to taxes.
Eventually, all of these small arguments turned into larger fights, which led to the colonists deciding to fight their own country and split from Britain and gain their independence.
In every war, there are events that lead up to it. Someone is upset about something and arguments happen, and that can lead to a war. So let's take a look at the events that led up to the American Revolutionary War.
The first thing we should talk about is the Stamp Act. Anytime you hear us say some kind of act, you can bet that the British were somehow taxing the colonies. The Stamp Act was the first direct British tax on American colonists and happened in 1765.
Every newspaper, pamphlet, and other public and legal document had to have a stamp or a British seal on it. The stamps cost money, and the colonists didn't feel like they should have to pay for something they had been doing for free for many, many years. So, of course, it made them upset.
Yes. Because they were upset, the colonies created the Stamp Act Congress, who told Britain how they felt about it.
And because the colonies reacted in such a way, the British government repealed, and repealed just means they took it away. They repealed the Stamp Act in 1766, but at the same time, they passed the Declaratory Act, and that basically said that Great Britain was superior and the boss of the American colonies in all cases whatsoever.
The Stamp Act gave the colonists a target for their anger, and the Sons of Liberty was formed in response to this act. Further, the Stamp Act Congress also gave the colonists a governmental model for the soon-to-come Continental Congress.
It's also important to talk about the influential people behind these events. So the first up is Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry was one of the leaders in the American Revolutionary War.
That's right. He had a voice that would not be silenced until Americans were free and could govern themselves.
Patrick Henry was elected to be the Virginia House of Burgesses, which was one of the colony's first representative governments in 1764 and was one of the key individuals in introducing the 7 resolutions against Great Britain's Stamp Act. You might have heard the phrase taxation without representation. Well, that was the loud and clear message from Patrick Henry to the government of Great Britain that the American colonists were tired of the rules and having power over them so far away.
The British didn't stop there because they had to pay for all of their bills from the 7-Year War, which escalated from a regional conflict between Great Britain and France in North America, known today as the French and Indian War. I mean, come on, 7 years of war that led to a lot of bills.
Yeah, it did. And also because they wanted to pay those bills led to the Townshend Acts in 1767. The Townshend Acts were a series of laws named for Charles Townshend, who was the British Chancellor of the Exchequer. And that's basically the treasurer for Great Britain. He's the guy who deals with all the money and the bills for the country.
These laws placed new taxes on the colonies for glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea.
We told you, anytime you hear the word act, there's a British tax involved. How do you think the colonists felt about that? Angry. Duh. They had the same response as when the British put the Stamp Act on them.
Eventually, Britain repealed or took away all of the taxes except the one on tea. Great Britain also sent more troops to the colonies because of all the protests by the American colonists that sometimes ended up getting violent.
On March 5th, 1770, in Boston, a disagreement escalated to a shouting match. A crowd then gathered, more British soldiers arrived, and the soldiers ended up firing their guns into the crowd. 3 people were killed right away, and many more were injured, some whom died later. This was named the Boston Massacre.
As a result of this, you can guess what happened. The colonists were angry. They were angry. So guess what? The focus of America resistance was to the presence of the British in Boston was heightened, and the American colonists no longer wanted them there. Shocker. Gosh, I got my tongue tied.
Big shocker on that one. In 1773, the colonists were still angry, go figure, because the British put a new act on them called the Tea Act. This act gave a monopoly on tea sales to the East India Company. Basically, the American colonists could only buy tea from that company, and it made them mad. Real mad. The East India Tea Company wasn't doing very well, and the British wanted to give it some more business.
Essentially, the Tea Act lowered the price of the East India tea so much that it was way below the price of tea from the other companies. Unless American colonists wanted to spend a lot of money on tea from another company or local colonial merchant, they basically had to buy it from the cheapest supplier, which was the East India Tea Company.
Of course, the American colonists had a response to this Tea Act, and that was to refuse to unload the tea from the 3 British ships that were sitting in the Boston harbor. This was the situation in Boston that led to the Boston Tea Party.
Oh, I didn't see you there. The Boston Tea Party happened on a cold December in 1773. There was tea involved, but there was no sitting around having tea time or a party. The Boston Tea Party was a protest by the American colonists against the British government. The Boston colonists, some of them calling themselves the Sons of Liberty, staged the protest by boarding the 3 ships in the Boston harbor, some of them even dressed in costumes. You may ask, why are they dressed in costumes? It's so the British would know who they are, but that didn't work. The costumes didn't fool anyone. They threw about 342 chests of tea into the water. The British knew who had destroyed the tea.
Right after this, the British Parliament passed 5 laws against the American colonies, giving their best effort to punish the colonies and keep them in line. These 5 laws were called the Intolerable Acts.
They were given the name Intolerable Acts by the American patriots who felt like they could no longer tolerate such unfair laws from the British.
The 5 British Intolerable Acts were the Boston Poor Act, the Massachusetts Government Act, the Administration of Justice Act, the Quartering Act, and the Quebec Act. You would think that Britain had never learned that the colonists never liked any of the acts placed upon them, and that they didn't and that they would learn from history, but they didn't. They'd learn nothing. They put another act.
Ah! So the Intolerable Acts became a rallying cry for patriots in the colonies. These colonists felt like these acts took away some of their basic freedoms, and in many ways, these acts actually helped to unite the colonies and push them one step closer to the revolution.
By 1774, the American colonists had had enough, and they started to come together. The Continental Congress was a meeting of the delegates from each of the 13 British American colonies. These delegates met together and acted collectively for the people of the 13 colonies, serving as the government during the American Revolution.
The first Continental Congress meeting was held September 5th through October 26, 1774, and they actually came together because of the Intolerable Acts that Britain had placed on the colonies. Delegates from each colony were present except for Georgia, which was fighting a Native American uprising and was dependent on the British for military supplies. Made sense they couldn't make it. And they met at a carpenter's hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Some of the most recognizable members of the First Continental Congress included John Adams, Patrick Henry, and George Washington. The president of the First Congress was Peyton Randolph.
During the first Continental Congress, the delegates discussed the current situation with Britain, which obviously wasn't good.
Yeah, obviously. The delegates took two major actions during the First Continental Congress. Number one, they sent a letter to King George III explaining their issues that the colonies were having with the way they were being treated. They actually demanded that the king stop the Intolerable Acts and threatened to boycott all English goods if it wasn't stopped.
The other major action taken at the First Continental Congress was the delegates would meet again in May of 1775 if the British did not meet their demands.
As you can imagine, we wouldn't tell you all of this stuff, and the title of the series wouldn't be The American Revolution unless something actually happened. So on April 18th, 1775, Paul Revere took a ride, and that's all I'm going to tell you about. Paul Revere took a ride, and that's all I'm going to tell you about. Paul Revere took a ride, and that's all I'm going to tell you about it until tomorrow. But I got to do a cool activity, and I'm not going to let Danielle explain what it is and share with you my assignment.
Oh, well, I see how it is. So wait, are you gonna tell us tomorrow, or are you not gonna tell us tomorrow what happened in the American Revolution?
You'll never know.
Oh, but I'm on the edge of my seat.
We're gonna have to wait and find out what happened after Paul Revere's ride. Don't worry, we will tell you the rest of that story tomorrow. But here's a fun activity for you to do. Think about all of the things that we've told you today and why the colonists would be really angry with the British. Spoiler alert, the American Revolution did happen and we went to war. But your job is to write a breakup letter or a breakup text message or a breakup Snapchat conversation between you as the colonists and Great Britain.
If you choose to write the letter, explain all of your feelings and be sure to give good reasons. If you're going for the text message route, make sure you include responses from Britain or King George III and make it like a conversation between you and the colonies and Britain. Finally, if you're going to do the Snapchat assignment, make sure you have text on your pictures to explain what's going on. You also need to have replies from Britain. For example, you could take a picture of you dumping tea out of the water and say, "What do you think about that, Britain?" And then the British may reply and with a very sad expression and cry and say, "You're ruining my tea time." Be creative and have fun. Krosh, will you share with us what you did?
No.
Please?
Yes.
Always have to ask nicely.
Yeah.
Okay, so first is going to be the colony's text, and then it's going to be Britain's text. Okay, so the colonies say, hey, or not Britain, King George III.
I think you should use a British accent for King George III, and then we'll know who is who.
And then a colonial accent for the colonies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
The colonies say, hey. King George III says, yeah. The colonies say, I'm breaking up with you. King George III says, why? The colonies say, I know you're taxing me. We are odor. And they correct it to we are over. King George III says, I can explain. The colonies say, what about depriving our benefits and jury? What about depriving our benefits and jury? King George III says, I thought we were over that, frowny face. And what about when I gave you lol, I did nothing for you. Oops, smiley face. The colonies say, and you put your armies here, and that's messed up, man. King George III says, I was trying to protect you. The colonies say, sure, mad face. King George III says, yeah, I was. The colonies say, and what about our stuff? King George III says, don't get started on that. And he misspelled that, so we corrected it to that. The only place we can get stuff from is you. And then message 13 was deleted. And then King George III said, what did you just say? And then the colony said nothing because King George is mad about the deleted message. And then King George III says, I am handsome. Do not mess with the only thing I care about. And then the colonies say, really? And then it says, this user was blocked at 7/4/1776 at 4:28 a.m.
That date will become important, and you'll know why tomorrow. Don't miss our next video on the Revolutionary War. Check out the links below for different activities on the events leading up to the American Revolution, and share with us your awesome breakup letters, text messages, and Snapchat conversations to the British. We'll see you tomorrow. Does anybody have anything else to add?
Nice
Bye.
work. I liked your letter. It was good.
I have something to add.
Okay, what's up?
I would like to tell you, bye.
Bye.